sad news, unfortunately, and this kind of ties into nostalgia because we're going to get nostalgic with this guy's Hall of Fame career. Mike McCallum, the body snatcher, passed away in Las Vegas at the age of 68. Hall of Fame multi-division world champion. And as you said at the top of the podcast, this was kind of unexpected. I know you're as plugged in as anybody, and you have a network and different people, but this really, to me, it came out of the blue. We didn't know that he had been sick, etc. If you watched the 80s and the 90s, there were some spectacular KO wins in particular. Hello, left hook bomb on Donald Curry for the body snatcher Mike McCallum.
Exactly. Look, Mike, I don't think it was. I don't think it was a matter of him being sick. I mean, the way that it was reported, I actually, the first place I saw this, they had reported it in some of the press in Jamaica, where even though Mike has lived in Las Vegas for a number of years, he's one of the great sports legends of the island of Jamaica. And basically, what it said was he was just not feeling well, and he pulled his car over, and he was end up, being found deceased. Unfortunately, I mean, a sad situation at that age. But in terms of his boxing, he is right up there. He didn't have the ability, I shouldn't say that. He didn't get the opportunity to fight the big four, Leonard, Hearns, Duran, and Hagler. But if you ask anybody around in that era, fighters, managers, promoters, TV people, media people, every single one of them will tell you that Mike McCallum was on the same level of those guys and would have competed and perhaps won some of those fights. And I'm not going to ever say bad about Sugar Ray Leonard. He's one of my idols of all time. Sugar Ray Leonard did not want to fight Mike McCallum because he knew that was a very, very dangerous fight that wasn't necessarily worth the kind of money and his prestige that there was when he took the gambles and took the fights with guys like Leonard, like Hearns and Hagler and Duran. Mike McCallum was on that level. This is a man who had a phenomenal amateur. He was 240-10 as an amateur. He was a top level amateur for a long time before he became a top professional. He was an Olympian in 1976, the same Olympic Games that we saw the Spinks brothers and Sugar Ray Leonard and plenty of other greats come out of. And as a professional, he was with that Lou Duva, George Benton group. He had a great team behind him in terms of his management and the training team that he worked with. And through the career, he also had top guys like, besides Lou Duva, he worked at one point with Eddie Futch. I mean, these are the elite trainers of that time. Had the great nickname Body Snatcher. And why? Because he's a phenomenal body puncher, obviously. He was one of the great body punchers of all time. He won titles in 3 weight classes, junior middleweight, where he held the title for quite a while, middleweight, and then eventually he went up and he won the title in the light heavyweight division. And he beat a whole bunch of good quality guys. Now, a lot of people might remember him because, at the end of his career, he got shut out, basically lost every round to Roy Jones. He's no good. But that was
one of us was in the house in Tampa, Florida that night. That was me for the body snatcher against Roy Jones. And you have pointed out in the past that was near the end of McCallum's career. He's not a light heavyweight.
You shouldn't ever think about that as accounting that doesn't really mean a lot. He had a draw with the prime James Toney. He beat Ayub Kalule, who was a top junior middleweight. He beat Julian Jackson, Milton McCrory. You mentioned the spectacular knockout against Donald Curry. Stevie Collins split the fights with Sambu Kalimbe, who was a guy that should be on the Hall of Fame ballot, but for whatever reason hasn't been. Jeff Harding in the light heavyweight division. He did lose 2 times in the first 2 fights against James Toney. He also lost to Roy when he was near the end, and he did have the loss to Fabrice Tiozzo, who at his peak, back in the day was another top fighter. It didn't last as long as McCallum's prime. But I'm saying he mixed with the best guys that were willing to fight him. But the big four of Hearns, Leonard, and Hagler and Duran, they didn't want any part of him. That's just the reality. You ask anybody that was around at that time. Basically it came down to at one point because he was with Emmanuel Stewart. Emmanuel basically chose Hearns over McCallum. I don't think it was because Hearns was necessarily more talented, but Emmanuel could be a business person also, and McCallum wasn't going to bring him as much money as Tommy Hearns, who was making a fortune because he was packing the house and scoring big knockouts. And as great as Mike was as a boxer, he never drew those kind of humongous crowds, but he fought a lot of top guys, and he also was heralded by everybody. You go back and look at the old publications, like the Ring magazine, for example, back in the in the day. In the mid 90s when they were doing the greatest junior middleweights of all time. They picked him as the second best junior middleweight in the history of the division. I mean, I don't think even if you were doing the list today, 30 years later, I don't know if a lot of that would change. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2003. I mean, he was one of the greats of the greats. And unfortunately, he's known, besides how good he was, the thing that people know him for is because guys wouldn't fight him. But he didn't have the, unfortunately, yeah, like I mentioned, a lot of the guys he fought, but he didn't have the glory of fighting his true peers when he was at his best. Him and Sugar Ray Leonard would have been obviously a very competitive fight, and I feel like it would have been a classic.
Well, and it's interesting. It's all intertwined to that Donald Curry knockout because we've gone over this before, but we'll just
Yeah.
briefly mention it here that was in and around the time period where Leonard was fighting Hagler and Donald Curry was mad and suing Sugar Ray Leonard because he believed that Leonard misled him into fighting Hagler for himself. And so then they are having the fight, and the Curry team is trying to get against McCallum. The Curry team's trying to get Sugar Ray Leonard off the broadcast. And there's all this talk about, well, if Curry wins the fight, will you fight Curry? And Leonard's trying to stay out of that. And then McCallum with the big booming left. And I still remember Barry Tompkins, the great announcer, the great HBO Hall of Fame announcer, was with us previously on the podcast. And he told us the story that night that he took a date to the fight in Las Vegas, the Caesars Palace Pavilion, for the McCallum Donald Curry fight. And the date, who he later married somebody else, but the date was sitting behind him on the HBO broadcast. He got a great seat right behind him, couple rows behind him. And when McCallum landed the punch, he said, I can hear my date on the crowd mic screaming, oh my God, he's dead. He's dead. And I know it's her behind me. And I'm like, oh, he's like, I'm shrinking. I'm paraphrasing. I'm shrinking in my chair while I'm falling the end of the fight because I can hear her. It was that devastating of a knockout. And one more footnote, Dan Rayfield, after Sugar Ray Leonard saw that left hand, I think he probably decided once and for all, I'm not fighting Mike McCallum, the body snatcher.
I made the
Period.
point. It's not that Sugar Ray Leonard was scared to fight anybody. It's that he just made a business decision to go in a direction that would pay him crazy amounts of money to fight other guys when the riches were not necessarily in the same ballpark to fight against McCallum, who, by the way, had long reigns. You know, I looked this up knowing we were going to talk about the unfortunate passing of the great Mike McCallum. 13 wins, 3 losses, 1 draw, and 8 knockouts in world title fights. And, you know, over 3 weight classes. I mean, he was the real deal. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He was one of the greatest fighters of his time. He is vastly underrated. I bet you there's people that maybe listen to our show. They certainly know the big 4 and they know the modern stars, but they made a herd of McCallum, but they never really watched his fights. I would say, you know what, take yourself down a rabbit hole on YouTube and go watch some of his biggest fights, and you'll be impressed because not only was he a tremendous puncher, but he was a tremendous technician and he had a lot of skills. He was really like I always have said this many times, that the kinds of fighters I like to watch are guys who are good boxers who can bring the sweet science but aren't afraid to mix it up and can crack also. And he kind of fell into that kind of category of guys that could definitely fight and could definitely box. And sometimes in the right circumstances, he would bring it out and he would fight you. And there was other times where he would do what he had to do to win the fight in box. I mean, he was versatile. He was extremely capable of fighting in a variety of styles, forward, backwards. And obviously the body punching was second to none. And, you know, it's an unfortunate loss. You know, I know a lot of people in the business that have been around Mike for years. And I've been around Mike many times in Vegas because he lived there. And he wasn't like some guys, they come to every fight. McCallum would show up at the fights occasionally, but was always a cool cat, had that like laid back sort of Jamaican attitude. I remember one time they were doing a fundraiser for the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame. That was run by my pal, Rich Murata. And they were doing some sort of like a mixer, sort of drinks and fundraising thing at one of the lounges in Vegas at the hotel we were at for the fight. And Mike came by, and you know what? There was a lot of like top boxing people there. There was a ton of people around Mike McCallum because everybody that was there was a diehard and they all knew who the guy was. And you could just tell looking at him that he was having the time of his life, enjoying being around, because he'd been retired at that point for a long time. He was the kind of guy, he wasn't super, super famous. He could walk, go to the store, go to the restaurant. A lot of people might not even recognize him, but you put him in a group of boxing people and all of a sudden, he's the center of attention. You could tell he was enjoying himself that particular night.